guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Alexis, and today I'm going to be sharing all the Heritage and Awareness Months I'm hoping to participate in terms of my reading choices and recommendations. This is just going back into my goals for 2023. If you haven't already, I did mention my goals in my New Year booktuber tag. That is a video I did not too long ago mentioning all my goals for the year when personal and bookish related. I will also say that my intention is to offer recommendations as well as share my own TBR, and hopefully if you want to participate as well, you will be doing your own video recommendations or posts about it and whatnot. But this is just one of my goals to be more inclusive in terms of what I'm reading, whether that be within the romance and subgenres within that. In terms of authors, I'll be trying both new to me and old to me. But I just want to be able to refer to other experiences and not just feel like I'm following the same regimen in terms of my reading choices, just to spice things up in terms of understanding, in terms of learning experience. And yes, I consider romance something you can learn from as well. It just tends to have acknowledgement of healthy relationships or sometimes toxic relationships, tropes that are used that can mirror real life. But of course, this may also mean that I'm branching out of the romance genre. That could be nonfiction or thriller, fantasy, things like that, that I have yet to try. Who knows? I don't have picks for those yet. But over the next few weeks and of course following months, I will be sharing TBRs, recommendations, and all that jazz. With that being said, let's get into my monthly picks for 2023. Disclaimer, I will just be reading off of the site and maybe sharing some thoughts that I have now regarding those monthly picks. So with that being said, February is considered Black History Month or African American History Month. Black History Month began as a way to teach people about the history of Black Americans and their contributions to society. It sought to ensure that their perspectives were included in the national narrative. Today, Black History Month is a call to inclusion year-round, as it should be, and celebrates more than Black history, but also the ongoing achievements of African Americans in all realms of society. So, that is what Harvard says, but as someone who identifies as half Black and I acknowledge my Black culture, I acknowledge that appearance-wise, that is what people are going to see me as first before they see Filipina or anything else. I acknowledge the stigma around the community. I acknowledge the racism and microaggressions that people experience, and then that can also relate in terms of gender or religion, various things of intersectionality that can be acknowledging the oppression of people of color. However, there are times, if not most times, I feel like the achievements of people of color, they are not acknowledged, or they are not acknowledged until much later than white counterparts. I will say this not only is referring to books, but of course, entertainment industry. This could be the common workplace and healthcare. Just having a Black doctor, sometimes people just don't seem to have understanding within those communities, and it also comes down to education and how the school system treats it as well. Even growing up, I can only think of 2 reading books or required reading assignments that actually were authored by Black people and in general by people of color. In my 12 years from first grade through 12th grade, 2 books by people of color, everything else by someone white. Don't get me wrong, those books are considered classics and excellent reads as well, and they also acknowledge problematic things. But whenever it came to people of color, I only had 2 books that I read, and both of them were talking about civil rights, but nothing in regards to like successes outside of the 1960s or before that when referring to slavery times. And this is something that could be improved in the reading world reading experience in just about any field that you could talk about, any topic. So I really want to find more reads talking about successes and overcoming the oppression or the situations that are brought forth. I want to see just Black characters, Black authors thriving. And as I do for any other month that I'll be picking, I want to find reads that really hone in on people's successes and achievements and overcoming things that they initially didn't think they would overcome. So that is for the month of February. And I will be sharing my TBR recommendations in upcoming videos. But of course, I do want this to be considered an incentive to read more diversely. However, I'm not going to only be picking authors that identify that as such throughout the year because, again, this goes back into just mixing things up. I'm not trying to focus solely on a singular celebration or heritage, if that makes sense. But I certainly want to expand my horizons and all that. After February, there is March, and that is considered Women's History Month. Women's History Month began as a smaller Women's History Week on March 7th of 1982 and was later petitioned by the National Women's History Project to become a month-long celebration. The month of March officially became Women's History Month in 1987 and gives us the opportunity to acknowledge historical contributions of women in the United States. International Women's Day is observed on March the 8th. And there is further information that can be found online as well. Romance in general tends to be written primarily by authors who identify as women. I will say that there are some picks that I came across recently that also talk about women's struggles. It could be within their workforce or struggling with relationships, not just romantically, but familial or friendship wise. So I do enjoy those type of reads, and I want to be able to find more and hopefully find new to me authors who identify as such and share something that is just in tune with my taste. April is considered Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Month. It recognizes the ongoing need to put an end to the crime of sexual assault. April is also a time to acknowledge the resilience of those impacted by sexual assault, including survivors and victims, as well as advocates and professionals supporting survivors, and to ensure that our homes, places of learning, and work are safe for all. This, again, ties into sexual assault awareness. This could be related to domestic abuse or verbal abuse, physical abuse. Stories that I have already read may include this as well. Maybe you can guess which ones I'm referring to or offer your own suggestions, but I will be getting into that more in April. Of course, the intention is to read diversely, as I said, throughout the year, so maybe I'll even find some recommendations before April, and that is the intention with spicing things up. May is considered Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It began in 1977 as a smaller 10-day celebration in May and transformed to a month-long observation in 1990. The month commemorates the resilience and legacies, traditions, and culture of Asians, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders across the United States. This also goes into AAPI Heritage Month. That's what you may have heard more, especially during COVID. I feel like people were starting to see more about the microaggressions that Asian communities face. I definitely had more worries as well for a family that is currently residing in California because instead of understanding how science works and how infection and the spreading of sicknesses works, people wanted to blame communities and they didn't even acknowledge the various communities within itself and assume all Asians are the same, which of course is not the case. Acknowledge the cultures and all that jazz. I certainly want to read more authors who identify as such, and I definitely want to find more characters by that because I've noticed even authors who identify as a minority sometimes write outside of their culture, and that's in general. I've noticed that authors are trying to be more inclusive, which is great, But I also want to see people who identify as such writing about their own stories or their own cultural stories. And I feel like that's definitely something I haven't been seeing within the romance community. Definitely in YA. YA is probably the most diverse genre at the moment, in my opinion. But yeah, we'll see. June is considered Pride Month. It was created to commemorate the Stonewall Rebellion, which took place on June 28 of 1969, considered by historians to be the start of the modern LGBTQ plus movement. The month commemorates the progress of LGBTQ plus history and civil rights and celebrates queer stories and excellence of the community. I know that I haven't been reading as many books, not nearly as many books, with LGBTQ plus representation or queer representation. I can probably even just count on my hand with those characters that are centered or the main characters of those books, unfortunately. And although I have plenty on my TBR, that is not enough. I need to be reading more about it, maybe acknowledge other authors who identify as such. If they even have that information out there, I don't know. But yes, this goes back into inclusivity and acknowledge it because love is love. I remember when I first started seeing that movement's information or love has no labels. You may be familiar with these type of images posted by those organizations, and as much as I agree with them, I have yet to truly understand the romance experience or how people navigate it because they had to maybe come out, how they experience it with families, and not all families are as accepting. I know within the Filipino community, for someone to be bakla is more uh, open or accepted. However, in media, it does tend to be more comedic, and it shouldn't be the pun, or people who identify as such should not be the pun of the joke, or the butt of the joke, I should say. But yeah, I just want to see more normalized love stories surrounding queer people. And I know I've been curious in my own experiences. I identify straight, but some people are just so attractive. I just don't know, and I question myself. Who knows? Maybe later in life things will change. But that's just me and coming from my perspective. July is Disability Pride Month. The Americans with Disabilities Act was signed by President George H.W. Bush on July 26 of 1990, a landmark law that prohibited discrimination against people with disabilities. In that same year, Boston held the first Disability Pride Day. Although Disability Pride Day isn't nationally recognized, parades are held in a number of places nationwide, such as Los Angeles, New York City, San Francisco, San Antonio, and more. In 2015, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio declared July Disability Pride Month in celebration of the ADA's 25th anniversary. The month is a chance to honor each person's uniqueness as a natural and beautiful part of human diversity. I've read a few books with some disability representation, but I certainly want to read more diversely about that, whether that be born naturally with a disability or disabled later in life from situations going on, just to gain a better understanding of that. September is considered Latinx Heritage Month. Latinx Heritage Month started as a week-long celebration in 1968 and has grown to a month from September 15th through October 15th to incorporate the independence days of Chile, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and Nicaragua. The month recognizes the legacies and contributions of individuals who trace their roots to Spain, Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Spanish-speaking nations of the Caribbean. I only have like maybe a handful of authors I've already read who identify as Latinx. We'll see. Hopefully I find more and offer some recommendations. I've only had a taste of it. I definitely enjoy the expansion of cultures that is being sought after in romances, and I definitely think it helps open people's minds to communities that they do not identify with or relate to. But the thing is, all cultures have relatable times, whether that be something about generational experiences, familial love, or generational trauma, um, whether it be abuse within families or stigmas that surround cultures, being an immigrant or being American born, things like that, that people I feel like would be more understanding of if they bothered picking up a freaking book. But that's just me. October is considered the LGBTQ plus History Month. It honors members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender nonconforming, and queer communities. October was chosen to nationally commemorate LGBTQ plus history, political activism, and contributions because several important dates fall within the month, including National Coming Out Day, which is October 11th, Spirit Day acknowledging LGBTQ plus youth, which is October 20th, and Asexual Awareness Week, which is the last week in October, among other celebrations. This, for me, feels very similar to June as the Pride Month. However, because again, historically, there are a lot of events that surround October for the LGBTQ plus community, it makes sense to draw more attention to it. But yeah, this maybe you will see recommendations or reads that I had in June that will be recommended in October, and hopefully the list just keeps going on. Lastly, November is the Native American Heritage Month. In November, Native American Heritage Month celebrates the long history of Indigenous people and communities. During this month, we acknowledge the rich culture, unique traditions, and ongoing contributions of Native Americans. I will admit, the only time, and I mean only time, Native Americans are even mentioned in my history books going to school were talking about the 1700s when it was like Pocahontas time and when the pioneers were coming for Thanksgiving and such. That was just civil, not even friends, just a civil day to be together and whatnot. And yes, there's a lot of unfortunate history surrounding that, national genocide. But outside of that, I hardly have any exposure to Native Americans. I follow a few influencers online. You may have heard of them as well. But it is a community that has been pushed. And I feel like, well, I guess you could say that for any minority group. But they are in particular ignored for news information, like things surrounding protests regarding pipelines or pushing them out due to oil spills affecting their natural environments or their locations, their reserves that they inhabit. So I want to be better in terms of acknowledging that and drawing attention to it because I may not identify as such, but you know, there are ways to be an ally, and learning is part of being an ally, a good ally for anything. So yeah, understanding is just essentially the goal for 2023. I want to expand my horizons. I want to be more understanding of various cultures, maybe learn a few languages. Hopefully, I do that. Maybe some travel. Who knows what's in store for the rest of the year? I already got some good news personally, but we'll see how that plays out in the next few weeks, and maybe I'll share that information. But until then, now you are aware what I'm hoping to do with 2023, and maybe you'll want to participate, maybe share your recommendations, what's on your TBR. I would love to hear because this is essentially just a way for me to hopefully find other bookish or like-minded people who are interested in reading. But yeah, as I said, my name's Alexis, and until next time, take care and happy reading.